Your gut may be working against you right now, and not because you're missing a probiotic, but because some of the bacteria living inside your gut, they have run out of food, and when that happens, they can start feeding on the very barrier that's supposed to protect you, which is the lining of your intestines. And over time, that can wear down that lining and set off a slow chain of problems. Problems like stubborn bloating and brain fog, that mid-afternoon energy crash, food sensitivities, and even low-grade inflammation that accelerates your biological age. But here's the part that the detox industry doesn't tell you. You don't need a cleanse or a tea or a supplement because your body already runs two real cleaning systems built to repair and to defend your gut. So in this video, I'll show you 5 science-backed ways to restart those systems to feed the right bacteria and rebuild your gut lining and help your gut repair itself naturally and potentially undo years of damage in the process. And if you're new here, I'm Dr. Kim, and on this channel, my mission is to give you the science and the practical tools to not only live longer, but to also feel better. And as always, the information in this video is educational only and not medical advice. Let's get into it. So the first system is the one that a lot of people in the wellness industry completely ignore. And it may be the most powerful cleaner your body owns. It's free, it's automatic, and most people have no idea it's even there, or on the flip side, that it actually stopped working. And the system is called the migrating motor complex. Think of it like a street sweeper, where it's a slow and strong wave that travels down your stomach and your small intestine, and it pushes out leftover food or any kind of dead cells and any stray bacteria. But here's the catch. That system only runs when your gut is empty. What actually triggers it is a hormone called methyllin. And methyllin only fires when your stomach has been empty for a while. The moment food shows up, methyllin just shuts off and digestion takes over. And it stays off until your stomach is empty again. And this wave cycles every 90 minutes to 2 hours, but only in the gaps when you're not eating. So picture a normal day for most people. We have breakfast, and then a mid-morning snack, coffee with a bite, and then lunch, and then an afternoon nibble on something light, and then dinner, and then something to eat before bed. If we eat every 2 to 3 hours, well then that sweeper never gets a chance to run during the day. So the road never gets cleared. And when that happens, bacteria can drift up into your small intestine where they don't belong, and they sit on the leftover food and they ferment it. And that fermentation produces gas, which then leads to bloating. And if you push that far enough, all that can contribute to SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where you just have too many bacteria growing in the wrong part of the gut. And a sweep that doesn't run often enough is one known trigger for this. Now, there are many causes for SIBO, and some people can eat every few hours without causing any problems, but that is one important piece of the puzzle that can cause lots of issues in some people. And the fix to this costs nothing. All you have to do is just space out your meals to 3 to 4 hours apart, no grazing in between, and that wave gets to run a full cycle. And that's it. And one thing to keep in mind here, it's the calories that stop the sweep, not just meals. So you can have black coffee or plain tea or water between meals, and that's fine. But a splash of milk in your coffee or a few almonds or sugar mint, well, that's enough to flip your gut back into digesting mode and kill that wave. So if you're spacing out meals, we need to keep those gaps actually empty and calorie free. So that's the first system, the sweep that keeps your gut clear. But clearing it doesn't rebuild the gut wall lining that tends to get thin or worn out over time. That's the second system's job, and that system runs entirely on what you feed your bacteria. And you've got 2 levers here, but most people only know the first one. So lever number 1 is fiber, and you can't digest most fiber, but your gut bacteria can. And when they ferment it, they make short-chain fatty acids, and one of them is butyrate, which does all the heavy lifting. Butyrate is actually the favorite fuel of the cells lining your colon. They use it for fuel to stay healthy and keep the gut barrier strong. So feed your gut bacteria fiber, and they hand back the exact fuel your gut wall needs to rebuild itself. And the same bacteria that feed on your wall when they're starving will rebuild it the moment you feed them the right foods. And there's an interesting study in Nature Communications where researchers took two groups of people, an African American population in the US and a group of people in rural South Africa. And they swapped diets for 2 weeks. And the American group increased their fiber from about 15 grams per day to over 50 grams. And most US adults eat only about 15 grams. So this was more than triple than what they were used to. And in just 2 weeks, that group had less colon inflammation and a decrease in colon cancer risk markers and more butyrate. And they saw reciprocal changes in the South African group who switched to the Western diet, which was low fiber and high fat. And predictably, they saw more inflammation in the lining of the colon and biological changes associated with a higher risk of colon cancer. All that happened in just 2 weeks. And by the way, not all fiber is equal here. The kind that can really drive butyrate production by the gut bacteria, that fiber is called resistant starch. And the easiest to get single source of that is legumes. So a daily serving of beans or lentils or chickpeas does more here than almost anything else. And another trick is to cook starchy foods, especially potatoes or rice, and then chill them in the fridge overnight. And some of that starch reorganizes into resistant starch. So cold day rice or a potato salad can actually feed your gut better than freshly cooked rice or freshly cooked potatoes. And another food to try would be slightly green bananas because they're pretty high in resistant starch content. But overall, we want to get resistant starch from many different sources to maximize that benefit. Now, lever 2, and this one actually surprised the researchers, but it makes sense, and it's fermented foods. There was a randomized prospective trial out of Stanford where one group of healthy adults spent 10 weeks of adding fermented foods to their regimen. So they were adding things like yogurt or kefir, and kimchi and sauerkraut, kombucha. And the other group, they loaded up on fiber instead, with an average of about 45 grams per day. Now you'd think that the fiber group would win, but when the researchers looked at microbiome diversity specifically, the people in the fiber group, their diversity barely moved. It was the fermented foods group whose diversity actually climbed, and they saw 19 different markers of inflammation in the blood go down. So the way I think about it is fiber feeds the bacteria that we already have, but fermented foods, they help bring in new bacteria and they help calm down our overreactive immune system. And we want both. And just a couple of servings of something fermented per day goes a long way towards rebuilding your gut. One important side note though, if you're not used to eating a lot of fiber, we don't want to go from 15 grams of fiber to 40 or 50 grams overnight because that can cause a lot of bloating and a lot of GI distress. So we want to increase gradually over several weeks. All right, so far we restarted the sweep and we're feeding the lining of the colon, which is so important. Now let's talk about what's tearing it back down, because sometimes the fastest way to heal something is just to stop the thing that's breaking it. And in this situation, there are two everyday additives that do most of the damage. The first one is a group of ingredients called emulsifiers. And these are additives that keep oil and water from separating, so your food stays smooth and creamy. And these emulsifiers are in a lot of processed foods. Foods like ice cream and salad dressings, sauces, some plant milks, and a lot of protein bars. There was a study in Nature that tested two of the most common ones. So the first one was carboxymethylcellulose, or CMC, and the other one was polysorbate 80, or P80. And in mice, both of them thinned out the slippery mucus layer that's supposed to keep bacteria from ever touching your gut wall. And without the protective lining, the bacteria can creep right up against the wall, which can trigger low-grade inflammation. Now, this was a mouse study, not a human one, but there are some small human studies that show that a diet high in emulsifiers can reduce your microbiome diversity, and it can prime the gut barrier to overreact to acute stress, which can then lead to more inflammation. And if you want to look for those on food labels, carboxymethylcellulose often shows up as cellulose gum, and polysorbate 80 is usually just listed by that name. or P80. And once you've seen them, you'll start noticing them all over the ultra-processed foods aisle. And the second additive is artificial sweeteners. And here the evidence is actually in humans. There was a randomized trial published in Cell where they took 120 healthy adults and they gave them common sweeteners, so saccharin and sucralose and aspartame and stevia, and they observed them for 2 weeks. And the sweeteners were all given at doses below the recommended daily limit. And after 2 weeks, researchers saw significant shifts in their microbiome. The groups that received saccharin and sucralose specifically, they also developed worse blood sugar responses compared to the control group. Now the interesting part, a lot of these effects were person-specific and microbiome dependent, meaning the effect really depended on the person's existing gut bacteria. So it wasn't the same for everyone, but for some people that impact was real. Now I want to pause here and give you some perspective because I don't want to turn this into fear. One protein bar or an ice cream here and there is not gonna wreck your gut. And we also don't have any strong evidence that diet soda is bad for everyone. Your gut is actually pretty resilient. That's really the whole point of this video. The real issue is the daily, all-day exposure. So the diet drink with every meal or packaged everything. So we don't need to read every label with a magnifying glass. We just want to shift the balance to where we're cooking and eating a little bit more whole foods, and we're leaning a little less on the packaged stuff. And that's how we rebuild that protective gut lining. So here's the one that actually has nothing to do with food, because you can do everything we've covered so far, space out your meals and feed your gut bacteria and clean up the additives. And you can still stall out if this one piece is off. And it all comes down to a single nerve called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the main wire connecting your brain to your gut, and it runs in both directions. And this was fascinating when I first learned about it, but 80% of the traffic on that nerve runs from the gut up to the brain and not the other way around. So your gut is actually doing most of the talking. In fact, over 90% of your body's serotonin is made down in your gut and not in your brain. Which tells you just how involved your gut is in this whole conversation. Now, which way the system leans really comes down to one thing. And that one thing is whether you feel safe or stressed. Your nervous system has two built-in modes that it relies on. The first one is the fight or flight system, which is your stress mode. And then you have the rest and digest mode, which is your calm mode. It's mostly controlled by the parasympathetic system. And you can't be in both at once. So when you're stressed, let's say you're running late or stuck on a tense email, or you're scrolling bad news on social media, well, your body reads that as a threat, and during threat, digestion is a luxury that your body just can't afford. It pulls blood away from your gut and slows everything down, and it drops your stomach acid. And that cleaning sweep that we talked about earlier, well, chronic stress can blunt that too. And the fix here can take as little as 30 seconds. If you're stressed, or anytime before you eat, just take 3 slow breaths and make your exhales longer than your inhale. Maybe twice as long. That long, slow exhale is a direct signal to your vagus nerve, and it really tells your brain that you're safe, and it will help you flip back into that rest and digest mode. And the last piece is timing, and more specifically, when you stop eating for the day. Now, earlier we talked about spacing out your meals so the sweep can run in between meals. But this one is a little different. This one is about preserving and even maximizing that overnight window, because your gut lining repairs itself the fastest when it's not busy digesting, and the longest, cleanest sweep happens overnight while you're fasting. So if you're eating late and then snacking before bed and then eating early the next morning, well, at that point, you're cutting their repair window short on both ends. And there's actually an internal clock to this. Your gut runs on a daily rhythm, just like the rest of your body. And many of the repair processes that help maintain your gut lining, those become more active at night. So eating around the clock really blurs that signal. But if you have a consistent fasting window at night, well, that lets you work with the rhythm instead of against it. And for the most part, it's a pretty easy fix. Just try to keep your eating inside a 10 to 12 hour window, and then finish your dinner at least 3 hours before bed. And then try to keep your meal timing fairly consistent from day to day, so your body can actually anticipate the periods of when it can go into repair mode. And there's studies that show that time restricted eating, where you get a consistent overnight fasting gap can provide protective effects on the gut lining and the gut barrier integrity. All right, I hope this was helpful. Stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one.